All right, today is Wednesday the 17th. If you look up on the screen here, you're going to see the same thing I just handed out to you. What I'm going to ask that you do between now and 11 is attempt to do this program. All right, so write a Java program that asks the user the number of students that are in a class. So the minimum is 1, the maximum is 5, use constants. Then ask the user how many tests each student took, between 1 and 3, and again use constants. Then use nested loops. In other words, a loop within a loop. You can use any looping constructs you want to. And ask for the grade that each student got on the test. Keep track of and print out the scores for each student. Also, it says print out the total class average for all students. It sounds like a lot of work. It's about 100 lines. All right. Use accumulators for the total possible points and the total earned points for the class. As far as input validation, don't accept a value less than 1 or greater than 5 for the number of students. Don't accept a value of less than 1 or greater than 3 for the total number of tests. And for the test scores, make sure they're between 0 and 100. All right. Then do that and get a break in, because after 11 o'clock, what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a hard copy of the way I did it. All right. And this will give you a chance to see how you're doing. You won't have to turn this in, but we will go over that program after the break. I will also tell you what your next assignment will be, and you will have all next week as lab. All right. So you can see how it works. So next week will be lab. The week after that, we'll go over chapter 5, and the week after that will be lab. And that brings us till right around the break, I believe. I think it's the week of the 19th or the 20th or something like that of March that we have break. So that's 8 weeks, and then we got 8 weeks afterwards. So we're going to pick it up as soon as we come back then on chapter 6. All right, did everybody get a copy of this? All right, you can call it whatever you want. Again, you don't have to hand it in, but it should give you a chance to gauge how you're doing in here, what you understand and what you don't understand. If you have time, if you get it done, or if you want to add this from the beginning, because I'm giving you this copy. What I did was I randomly generated the test scores. I made a second copy of it, and I randomly generated the test scores. And actually, it's between 0 and 100, not 1 and 100. But then there was no need to validate the test scores because I just called the random number function. And I sent the output to a file as well as to the screen. So you're going to get to see all that. Like I said, I've got the copies. They're here someplace. I'll find them. All right. So everybody understands what you're doing. I'm just going to pause the video now, and I'm going to pick it up again at about exactly 11 o'clock. All right. Resume that. Hopefully, as we go over it, if there's something you missed, all right, you'll say, oh, yeah, I should have done that or whatever. And if you had a problem with anything, as always, please ask. All right? So, first 30 lines are just comments, so I'm not going to go over any of those. You've got those. What did I add here? I imported java.io.star for 2 reasons. First of all, because we've got throws IO exception in here. And second of all, because I put a print writer object in here. All right? What I did originally, and I guess I could have left it there, but what I did was when I first did this and I put the throws IO exception, it gave me the underscores, but then it just said all I needed to add here was, it's like IO exception or something like that. All right? But if I would have put that in and just had that one, then I would have had to have created another import statement for this. So I could have either used 2 import statements, or I could have just done the import java.io.star. So I chose that one. All right. I set up a decimal formatter in here so that when I did the average for the class, it would show to 2 decimal places. I did the java.util.random in here so that we could have the random numbers for the scores. So again, I can put comments here for IO exception and print writer. And again, this is for the class average, 2 decimal points. This generates random test scores. And this last one that's in here, the option pane is just literally for that. It's for the input dialog and the message dialog. All right. So what we're going to get into, just so you know this, when we get into Chapter 5, we're going to change the way we're writing these programs. We're not going to write everything inside of main. Ideally, when we get to Chapter 5, main will become a driver. So what main will do is it'll call all of the other routines that need to be called in the program. All right? And I've equated this in the past, and maybe you've heard me say this in other classes, that really a driver, what main should be, for lack of better words, is kind of like a conductor for an orchestra. The conductor doesn't play any instruments, but she or he is very, they're very important to the orchestra playing correctly because they'll point to somebody to come in, be louder, be softer, but they're directing what's going on. They're driving the orchestra, so to speak. All right. So when you look in here then, move that over just a tad. Here are my constants. Min students, 1. That's the smallest number of students. Now you might say, why'd you make 1 and 5? Because I didn't feel what I did it the first time like typing in all that stuff. Because if you chose 5 and you chose 3, that's 15 different test scores you had to enter in. I didn't want to do that. All right? So when I tested, I used 3 and 3 all the time. Okay? So I've got min students, max students, min test taken, max test taken. And notice in mine, in this one, I've got a max test score. I no longer have a min test score in mine. I don't have to because I've told the system that what I want is I want it to generate a random number between 0 and 100. So why did I keep that max test score in there? I did it for a calculation that I do later on in the program. So I didn't have to put in the literal value 100. All right, so these are my constants. Again, these are the non-changing values that are in the program. All right, any questions on any of those? What I did, why I did it?
For your max test score, why would you declare that up there instead of when you do the validation?
Let me see if I'm answering your question. Okay, the way that I set my programs up is I put my constants, then my variables, all right, then my code. Okay. All right. Now, what you're going to notice is when we start talking next time, if I were to take these, we're going to add a bunch of methods. I'm going to grab this program and I'm going to take everything that we've got in here and we're going to make them all into different methods. All right. And then what you'll see is once we get in here, this isn't what you asked exactly, but this, if I want to use that all over the place, then instead of defining it in main, I'll have to define it in here. So I'll have to define them up here because anything I define up there becomes global to the entire class. It's considered okay policy, so to speak, to go and make all of your constants global. So you don't have to pass them around. They're constants. But what we'll get to is, I shouldn't make all of these variables. If I'm going to have 7 or 8 different methods, I should not make all of those variables global because they're not needed in every one of the methods. What you can end, anytime that you have a variable that you've defined someplace that you change in a someplace else. So if I define it on the top and I change it someplace in a method, that's known as a side effect. And sometimes side effects are what you want. But now if I go and write 7 or 8 methods, I could just come down at the end and decide, I don't want the average. Maybe I figured out the average and it was real bad. It was a 27. Well, I could come into there and before I print it out, I could manually change it from a 27 to a 72. I shouldn't be allowed to do that. All right. So what you're going to see is we're going to start passing variables from one routine to the other. And you'll be doing the same thing if you're not already doing it in the C# class. All right. So here are the variables. Again, the number of students in the class, the number of tests each student took, the points that they earned, the total number of tests that were taken. What's the total number of tests that were taken? It's the number of students times the number of tests, correct? So if I had 5 students and each student took 3 tests, there would be 15 total tests. All right, and then to find the total points possible, I take that total tests and I multiply it by 100. I tried to keep this to what I thought was about as intuitive as possible. Now you could say, hey, wait a minute, Jeff, what if we have quizzes in here too? Or what if each test is not worth 100? Then you'd have to write, you'd have to adjust your logic accordingly. I kept it simple for this example. I mean, if I'm giving you something and asking you to put in about 100 lines of code in an hour, that's enough. All right? When I actually rip stuff out of here and I'll put it back in later. But what I had in here originally was not just figure out the class average, but figure out the average for each student. So if I had 5 students and each student took 3 tests, give me those 5 averages, then give me the combined average at the end. We'll put that in next time. And we'll also add to that, well, what's their letter grade going to be? Where we'll say 90 and up is an A, 80 and up is a B, 70 and up is a C, 60 and up is a D, below 60 is an F type of an idea. And we'll do that using a switch statement, all right, or at least part of it will be done with a switch statement. We'll have to incorporate that in there because we haven't used it very much in the semester. All right, so then I've got my total average, so that's the class average. Remember, I'm still reading some variables in, or I was originally at least. Yeah, I still am reading some variables in, the number of students and the number of tests. So that's what that input str is, because I have to read that in as a string, then write the integer.parseInt or call the integer.parseInt on that. This basically is just setting up a new random number object. Not doing anything with it yet, all right, but it's just setting it up. And then this is setting up, so we're going to have this file, and if you look at the handout that I gave you, and you look at the very back page, the front of the back page, I guess you'd say, that's an example test run. All right? So we've got in here our decimal formatter, and again, there's other ways of doing this. Notice I kept it simple. The best average, in my mind, the best average somebody could have would be 100. They got 100 on everything. Well, that's actually not going to happen, because if now I'm figuring out the tests randomly, okay, the chances even if I have one class with, let's say, 3 students, the chances of a random number generator generating 100 every time should be 0. All right, then it's not random if you're doing that. But I set it up like this anyway. All right, then we've got our show input dialog that says the number of students in the class. Now notice how I broke this up. It'll say number of students in class, then there'll be a line break. Then it'll say must be between, and notice I use the constants in here. All right. All you can do when you're writing a program or an app or whatever, if you're writing something for someone, what is it? Ron White that said you can't cure stupid. So if you ask the user, if you tell them that this must be between 1 and 5, and they continue to put in 0 or a negative number, or they continue to put in a number greater than 5, you can't help that. We could put a test in here that gave you 3 tries, and maybe otherwise we just put a message on the screen that said you're hopeless and got them out. But that's not considered really good programming practice either. All right, so we put this in, we convert it over to an integer, and then we have to check to see if it's within range. So this is our validation check. So, and let me just break it up over 2 lines here so it's a little easier for you to see. So while it's either less than 1 or it's greater than 5, I just ask them to do it again. I just copied everything from up here down to here. All right. I could have given them a message that said invalid input or something like that. Hopefully one of the things that you're going to be going over in C#, if you have not already, is when you're doing these message dialogues, message box, whatever the heck they're called in C#, it's much easier in C# to go and add things where you put a nice title on the top and you can put an icon in there too. All right, so like if you want to say error, you might put the little red X to show that it was an error. It's much harder to do that in this language. All right, because the stuff's not built in. You basically have to go and program it in yourself. I didn't want to take the time to do that. Then we ask for the number of tests. So this is the same thing, but rather than asking for the number of students in here, we're asking for the number of tests. And again, then we go and verify it. So while the number of students is less than, and that should have been tests. Boy. That's students, and that should be tests. See that?
Is it like that on the printout?
It probably is.
I better mark that then.
Yeah, you all should mark that. So if you look on your printout, I don't know where this would be, but right after it says num tests right here, I shouldn't have checked for num students. That was naughty. All right, that should have checked for, well, num tests is greater than, what do we call this? Min tests taken and max tests taken. Because otherwise you're checking the wrong thing. Sorry about that. I don't know why I didn't notice it, but I didn't notice it. So now, so please make sure that you change yours accordingly so that it looks like this in the while loop. All right? I'll leave that up there for a minute. And then we come down and say, okay, the total number of tests will be the number of students you had. So let's say I put in 3 students. And the number of tests I had. Let's say we put in 4 or 3 again. So it'd be 3 times 3 or 9. Then the total points possible will be that 9. All right, will be that 9 times 100. Again, I could have hard-coded 100 in there, and if I did that, that's the only place now I believe I'm using max test score. All right, so you could make a case and say you really didn't need this. You could have removed that there and just come down here and change that to 100. That's true. Bless you. Then I have what? I've got nested for loops. I've got a for loop within a for loop. So this will say student 1, test 1, student 1, test 2, student 1, test 3. Let's say we have 2 students and 3 tests. Then student 2, test 1, student 2, test 2, student 2, test 3. Does that make sense? That's how it's going to iterate. So we've got the first one is iterating through students. The second one is iterating through tests. So I bring in my first student, and if they have 3 tests, it's going to iterate over this 3 times. So 3 times it should ask me, or in this case, I just did the random number, so it's going to generate 3 different test scores. Generate the score, then immediately show me the student number and the test score number and the points they earned, and also write it out to the file. And what am I doing here? Somebody tell me? The line that's in blue. Yes. Yes, I'm adding to the accumulator or running total. Very good. All right, so that's going to make sure, and I'm going to use that when I'm all done to figure out the class average. All right, so I come through here, let's just keep it simple. Let's say 1 student and 1 test. So we come in here, we run through this once, boom, we're done. Then we come down here, we figure out the total average. Notice I made it a double, and I had, this is an int, that's an int, and that's an int. I guess I am using it over here too. So that's an int, those are all ints. I wanted to make it double so that I'd be able to take the result, have that be a double, and then set it to just 2 decimal places for an average. All right, so I'm casting right there. Again, I could cast this, I could cast this, I could cast the whole, there's a lot of ways this could be done. All right, then when I got all done, I just printed out all the final totals here. And you notice every time I did a J option pane, I copied everything in the J option pane out to output file .println. All right. So again, please, if you didn't do so, please fix this on yours. All right. And you know what? I'm just so you know this. I understand that there are people who miss class, and I really, for whatever reason. All right, Roger let me know wasn't gonna be here Monday. I get that. There are other people who just miss because they don't come. Okay? I remember years ago I had a guy, he hardly ever came, and I called him about it one day in class. And he was actually a real funny guy, a very nice guy and a good student. But he said, Jeff, it's an 8 o'clock class. And I got up this morning and I went like this. I went school, sleep, and sleep one. I get it. I understand that. But at the same time, when people say, well, can't you just put that out there online? Yes, I could, but I'm not going to. All right? Because to me, that belittles what I'm doing in here. So I'll give you a hard copy, and I'll take whatever extra hard copies I have, and I'll put them back there so that people can have those. But if you want this, you key it in yourself. Is there anything that we just went over on this, and I'm going to run it now, but is there anything that we just went over that didn't make sense?
When you did the test average,
Yes.
do you have to typecast that? Because when I did it, I didn't typecast it.
It'll run.
But it makes more program.
Well, see, what you got to realize is if I go here and I do, let's say I'll remove the cast.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do an int divided by an int. All right, it's going to throw away any decimal component because integer division does that, and it'll change it basically to a 0.0. All right, so you don't have any guarantee that you're going to get the right answer. The easiest way to run this is to literally do some test data. Have one student who takes like 3 tests and put in 3 numbers where you know that when you do this, it's going to result in some kind of a decimal, and look at it and make sure. All right, so if I save this again, I think I have. No, I haven't. So if I save it and I run this, you'll notice, again, I tried to format it so it doesn't look too bad. And if I put something out of range, it just comes back and asks you again. All right, so I'll say 3 students. And again, out of range, it just comes back. Let's say 3 tests. All right, student 1 got a 30. Student 2, or on their test 2 was a 24. Test 3 was a 72. Then we go through student 2. All right, and student 3. And there's 9 students, 900 points. See, the bad thing about doing it is a random number generator truly is random. All right, so probably I would not have 3 students in a class where the average was a 50 or a 51. And if it was, I probably wouldn't be around real long. All right, but the point is, what I'm just trying to show you here is when we did this, by coming in here and putting in that random thing right there, by putting that in, that meant that when we came in here and did this, we did not have to verify that the score was in range. So there's no while loops in there that made sure that for each test we entered a number that was greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to 100. We didn't have to do that because we called a built-in method, Java method, that guaranteed that for us.
Can we do that if we want to, though?
You still could do it, yeah, sure.
That's what I was going to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a cleaner way of doing it, but the reason I changed it to this, I mean, it's a good question, but the reason I changed it to this was I tried to bring in everything that was in this chapter. All right, yes?
Instead of doing greater than or equal to 0, couldn't you do greater than -1 and
Yeah, there's sure. Yeah, you can. There's a lot of ways that you can set that up. And again, the way that I had mine set up originally was I had a min test score of 0 in there. And I said, well, greater than or equal to min test score and less than or equal to max test score. That's the way that I have it. I've actually got 2 versions of this in here. Come on. See, that's the original one with tests. And with that one, so again, this was the original one. So notice in here, there's the test right there. While it's less than or it's greater than, so when it's out of range, we're just asking them to do it again. So again, there are a lot of ways that this could be done. I sat there yesterday and took a program out of the book and wrote it, and then I thought, I don't like this program at all. So I made one up, all right? And that's what I did. And like I said, I thought this would be good because what we can do with this is we can go on now in the next chapter and bust this up into a bunch of different methods so you can see how that's done, all right? So just so you know, as we go on in here, I think chapter 5 is on methods. Chapter 6 starts introducing you to really to object orientation and more depth and breadth of coverage. We go into more classes. And then what you're going to find out is you're probably, for most programs, you're going to have at least 2 different files. You're going to have main in its own file. All right, we'll get into that at a later time. Then chapter 7, I believe, is on arrays and array lists. All right, I don't remember 8 and 9. One of them is on wrapper classes, and I think 9 talks about classes and more depth and breadth of coverage. We probably will get to the point where I will lecture on all 9 chapters, but you probably won't have any homework for like the chapter 9 one. It'll just be too close to the end of the semester. All right, and the last time I want to give out any homework will be around the beginning of May. All right, just so people have enough time to finish. Okay. All right, so let me stop this. I'm going to stop the lecture and start the lecture up again. All right, and the reason I'm going to do this is I'm done now with this part, but then I want to go over the homework with you.